Well, hello DP1. So we have spent some time learning about watercolor basics, about the two basic processes of doing wet to dry techniques. And so one of the first things that we learned was applying watercolor on your paper when it's dry. And if the brush is wet, that's called wet to dry. And then we learned the process of wetting the paper first and then coming in and adding additional water with the watercolor. That's called wet to wet. The other thing that we spent some time learning in our last experience together, we talked about creating parts of our color theory chart. And we actually spent the majority of that talking about creating each of the individual pie sections, okay, for our color theory work, for our color wheel section. I showed you guys last time how to draw this out, how to label it. I've got the example charts that are already on the computer for you in Schoology and in the daily lessons that you can reference. I showed you guys how to start at the back of your pie shape and gradually have more water so that you're getting a value transition that's showing me that you can range the colors to create tints, which would be where you have more white showing. And we said last time that the white for our watercolor work is going to be the white of the page. Today, what we're going to do is talk about the next step. So after you do your entire color theory color wheel, which is what this is with those 12 colors that you are mixing using only, you're starting with your primaries and you're mixing all of these colors by hand. Today, we're going to learn how to do another really important thing for you to understand when you're doing color mixing and creating your own colors is how to create what is called an intensity scale. And if you look over here on this side, you can see this is an example of an intensity scale. When you're creating an intensity scale, remember that intensity means the purity or brightness of a color. And so we vary a color's intensity by taking it in its pure state, and you vary it. In our situation, we're going to vary it 9 times. So you're going to vary it 9 times using that color's complement on the color wheel. So after you've completed your color wheel, you're then going to choose a pair of complementary colors. So the example that I have over here is a complement pairing of blue and orange. And so what I would do is, of course, mix up my colors first and have those ready, my orange. And then I'm going to vary this by taking one pure version. Usually we have the secondary color or the lighter color, and we start with that and then vary it by adding the opposite or complement in small amounts and create 9 variations. And that's what I'm going to be showing you today. The first thing that we'll want to do is to draw out our chart. And so we're going to be using, again, this sheet. Okay, obviously I did this as the example to show you guys how to do your pie chart. So I'm going to do my intensity scale on this side this time because that's where I have extra space. And to do that, I'm going to start with my ruler. To make this easy for yourself, you could use a straight edge. I would probably just use a ruler. The easiest way to do this is to simply come in and trace the ruler and make each of your blocks 1 inch in length. So if I were to just come in like this on the side and trace all the way down to the 9, that's going to give me 9 spaces or 9 variations to make my scale. Because remember, I'm going to be dividing this. You can see the pencil in that still. I'm going to divide it into 9 equal sections. So I've drawn one side, and you could simply come in and trace the other side if you wanted your blocks to be a little bit bigger. Come down to approximately the 9. A lot of times people will do half of a ruler and make it thinner, whatever works for you. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to make my division lines. And you want these to be approximately equal. So we're doing it on inches just because that's simpler. And then obviously we're going to make a straight edge. One trick with making the straight edge, line up the end of an inch on that line with your ruler like this so that it connects and is straight, and then just make a straight line on the top. So find a line on the ruler, line up your pencil line with the line on the ruler, and then just connect it. So we're doing this before we start any painting. Because this is color theory work and this is just a scale, if my pencil shows, that is totally okay. It's not a problem. When we get into actually creating projects using watercolor, which we will be starting this week, you're going to want to draw more lightly with your pencil. And we'll talk about, hey, should I use either a watercolor pencil, which is a soft, a very hard lead that gives you very light lines, or you might want to use a watercolor pencil that dissolves, or incorporate the pencil into your design. So now I have my intensity scale. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to label the side of this, because remember, part of your grade for this, when you take your final photograph and upload to me your color theory chart, you should have your color wheel completely painted in with all the colors. You should have each color labeled, just like I showed you. Most people make a key so that they are labeling it not only with the color name, but I also need to see that you have included its category name. For example, red is a primary, okay? Orange is a secondary, and you can see our coding system, and then the T is on the tertiaries, like red, orange, okay? On the other side for that intensity scale, we're gonna label this as an intensity scale. Intensity scale. And then what you need to do is choose your complementary color pairing. Okay, and so I could do blue and orange again. I could do red and green. Usually I let students vote on what colors I end up doing. I've already put a little bit of water. I dropped a little bit of water on the top of my watercolor cake. As I mentioned, you guys, is a good idea just to soften it a little. And I put some already on the red and the yellow and the blue. And then I realized after I did that I'd already done one in those colors, but we'll do the same too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and mix up my two colors. I'm going to start with my lighter color at this end, and so this is going to be my orange. And my blue is going to be at this end. And so I'm going to start with a pure orange, and I'm going to gradually add in small amounts of blue to create a transition like the one that you see here. And if I were doing, let's say, red and green, maybe I do my red swatch here, or I do my green swatch here, and then gradually add in that color 9 times. It does not matter which you start with. You can start, most people start with the secondary color at this end, but that's not a rule as long as you're doing gradual increments. The other thing, usually people, when they're doing the yellow and violet pairing, it's a good idea for that particular group to start with the pure yellow first and then gradually add in little bits of violet. So I'm going to mix up my colors first, and I'll put this here so you guys can see this. I've got my 2 containers of water like we mentioned before. I'm going to start out with my softened yellow. I'm going to mix some orange in one of my trays. Top of my lid. You could use any of the little lid systems that I showed you guys for mixing. You could use your plastic lid. You could use an old egg carton as long as it's made of styrofoam. I know those are bad for the environment, but they do make good little paint trays. I'm going to make kind of a lot of the orange because I'm going to need it for multiple swatches. And then after I have that mixed, I'm going to mix in, clean my brush. And since this is the first dip in the water, I'm just going to use 1 water. And then I'm going to come into my red. You're going to be tempted, since you have these secondary colors already made for you in these pans, to use those. But it will create a different kind of color, and I will be able to see it. The orange does not look exactly the same as the orange from this tray. So because we know that red is a more powerful pigment, I'm going to start with just a little bit of red on my brush, and since I put the red over here, I can contaminate these freely. I'm going to come in and mix that in. You can always add more, so start with a 1 brush full of the red. And as you can see, just that small amount of red that was left on my brush makes a really nice orange. So for my first swatch, which is what I call these little sections, this is what you use for art speak, I'm going to come in and I'm just going to do the standard orange. Now I'm doing something that's a little dangerous here. I'm putting my paints on top of a project. You should not do that. Yours would be over here, but for the video, so you can see what I'm doing, I'm going to leave this here. Notice that this is a wet to dry application. So wet to dry is going to give me more clean edges. It's going to make my detail look a little more clean edge. Makes my colors more intense and vibrant. So that's going to be my very first swatch. I'm going to clean my brush, both of my waters, and then I'm going to come in and I'm going to get a little bit of blue. And again, I'm going to do this on the side so that I don't contaminate any of my colors here. Now the blue is a very dominant dark pigment, and because it's such a dark dominant pigment, I strongly encourage you to really clean your brush before you start, and then just take small amounts. And I'm drying off my brush here on a towel. So I'm going to take a little bit of my blue. I'm just touching the tip of that brush, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to add that into this orange. And you can see that even with just that small addition of that blue, it is changing that orange pretty substantially. When you change a color's intensity, you're making it fit more into the neutral range of colors. Neutrals would be things like browns. Some people will tell you that the neutrals that you get when you're doing color theory work are unattractive. I disagree with that. I think any color can be amazing and look awesome. It depends on what you pair it with. So in other words, it depends kind of what color is next to it. Quite honestly, I'm a big fan of this color, even though some people say that it's kind of an kind of color. Ironically enough, doing this intensity variation that we're doing right now is exactly how you would create the color of olive green. Olive green is actually created when you start out with yellow and you add a small amount of violet into it gradually, and it creates olive green, which you would never think of, but it does. So I'm going to do another swatch, take a little bit more of that blue, add it in. You might need to do 2 coats of your watercolor if you want a nice flat color. Watercolor, because of the nature of the paint, because it is more translucent, it is perfectly normal to have some of the white of the page show. You will have a variation in the colors, even if a lot of the white shows from the page. I just happen to like the color application for all color theory work to be a little thicker. And that's probably because usually when I teach this unit, as you guys are already aware, I do this particular unit with acrylics. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to do a pretty giant step here. I'm going to add a lot of that blue in so that you can see that this color is drastically changing. Notice that I'm thoroughly mixing. I'm going to do it on this side so I can go a little faster. Now, theoretically, we could do this, 500-600 times to infinity almost if you were gradual enough with your color increments. But theoretically, we should get back to a pure blue at some point, or we should range from the orange all the way to pure blue. But that would take many, 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 many swatches that we're not going to do. I'm going to go pretty extreme here, so you guys can see how this is getting darker. Notice the change in that color. A lot of the greens that you see in nature and things like landscapes are going to be the kind of greens that you would get when you're mixing complementary pairs. That olive green that I mentioned when we do yellow and violet together, that color and this color that you're seeing here, this kind of darker green, these are the kind of colors that you would see on tree forms. And I'm going to come in and make a really dark one here. And you can see this is becoming more and more blue. And you would continue doing that. And so what I will have to do now is I'm going to have to get some more blue. And this is the way that you get kind of a forest green. Okay, like an evergreen blue. If we were doing evergreen trees, this is the kind of green that you could use in the shadow areas of a painting for that. And I'm mentioning some of this because what we're going to be doing eventually with these watercolors is looking at some things in nature and doing some painting. And you obviously would want to think about craftsmanship, keeping your edges as clean as you can. I'm going to clean this out, and then for my final, I'm going to use, I think, just a pure blue. And you can see that this is a little too abrupt to the blue. You can tell that the blue is really different from the one right beside of it. So to remind you, and I'm going much faster than you should, which is why my edges are messy here. So to remind you of what you're going to do today, you're going to draw out your scale using a ruler. You need 9 sections. You're going to label that scale intensity scale. You're going to choose a pair of complementary colors, and your complementary colors, those pairings are, to review with you, there's orange and blue, which is the pairing that I used here. Red and green are complements, and then yellow and violet are complements. So choose one of these pairs, just one, and you're going to do a scale like the one that you see here. And this is kind of our ultimate goal. And remember, yours will be finished, but this is kind of what we're going for. Okay. And then don't forget also that on the sides, you want to do a swatch for me of your primary colors, your secondary colors, the complements, and analogous. Okay. And so that is kind of your goal. And remember, analogous meaning colors that are next door neighbor colors on the color wheel. So colors like this. All right. All right. Have at it. Have fun. I'll talk to you soon.